I've been looking at the mainstream media today. Well, not the television media, because I don't have a television license, so I can't watch live streaming in this country for our complicated and rather silly reasons. But I have been looking at the newspaper headlines, expecting the big story to be there. You know the story I'm talking about, the biggest story that has been around for, well, generations really, since at least the war. We had a medical procedure that was pretty much enforced on everyone. Most people were either cajoled, in some cases mandated, but persuaded very heavily to take a certain medical procedure because we had a virus, did we not? And this was going to be the antidote to save us. But there's been questions about this antidote, this medical procedure, this experimental medical procedure, and we have a yellow card system. Now, I've spoken about this a few times, and you'll know exactly really where I'm going with this, because although we've had this rolled out and across the world, and although everywhere else you look, apart from mainstream media or indeed the government themselves, you see it. You hear about it. I get letters all the time, emails I'm getting from people who say a family member has died unexpectedly, or a friend or a relation has had very disabling times with this. And they're telling me this, and people across the social media are talking about this, and yet the government and the mainstream media don't seem to be making the slightest murmur of this. Well, I say that, of course, we did have one MP who stood up very bravely, I thought, Andrew Bridgen from North West Leicestershire. He stood up in December. I mean, we're coming to the end of January now. He stood up in December and said there was definitely a problem. The ONS's own figures, the Office of National Statistics' own figures, gave us the strange number of excess deaths that were happening. We have the yellow card system, which was telling us that there was harm in the region of nearly 500,000, 500,000 people had been harmed at that point. And we know that the yellow card system really is only registering about 10% of those people who've actually had harms, because not everybody even knows about the yellow card system, and people sometimes can't be bothered, or that it's so severe they've got time to deal with it, they're just getting on with it. So we know that these numbers are real, and we know that they're high, that people who've had this medical procedure have been having problems, and yet still, and I don't understand this, still the government are not saying anything, still the mainstream media are not talking about it, but every other media you can think of is talking about it. I wanted to see what had happened to Andrew Bridgen after he'd made that comment. And I noticed that in the press in early January, certainly, there were a lot of hit pieces against him. People calling him anti-vaxxer, people saying that he was anti-Semitic, people being pretty nasty about him. And then the newspapers, the mainstream ones, were continuing to say, no, it's safe and effective. And you couldn't help feeling that there was a message here that was not permitted, not allowed to get out for some reason. And I can't think why that would be, because there seems to most definitely be a problem with this medical procedure, and yet the government won't talk about it. I've actually had people email me to say they've written to their MP and they've asked about it, and they get back either a very bland statement or just a reassuring one that they definitely tested this medical procedure, this experimental medical procedure, and it's absolutely fine. There's no problem to worry about it whatsoever. I wondered what would happen if more people got in touch with their MPs, if they had seen or had first-hand experience, or a family member were to get in touch. If more and more people wrote to their MPs by email or by letter, or knocked on the door and asked them and put the pressure on them, because it just seems so absurd that one MP, one brave MP, one would think, has stood up to talk about it, And even though he's been vilified in the press, you wonder, what would motivate someone? Why would you basically put your career on the line if there was no problem, if there was nothing to worry about? That's what I don't really understand. So it seems to me that Andrew Bridgen had a point. In fact, I've been in touch with the office, his constituency office, and asked if I could have an interview with him. So watch this space. We may be able to talk to the man himself. But in the meantime, I think it would be very interesting to see what would happen if many more people were to write to their MPs and say, look, we're worried, we're concerned, the government aren't talking about it. Why? Because it's everywhere else.